Podcast giant Joe Rogan seemed close to endorsing Donald Trump for president on a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience. Let's watch.
President for 4 years, and the country was in a great economic situation.
Yeah.
And it looked like his policies were actually effective, and that it looked like the unemployment was down, all business was building, regulations were being relaxed, more things were getting done. You know, when you look at it from a policy perspective, if you just look at it on paper, what he did was effective. A lot of people think it was effective. You don't like him as a personality, so you ignore that. Don't do that. Look at it in terms of a policy perspective. People liked the ideas that he was putting forward.
Rogan, of course, did not hold punches when making his case against the incumbent president.
I never thought that Biden was going to make it. I never thought that he was going to be functional. You know, like regardless of what kind of power the president actually has. And it appears under Trump, the president has a lot more power than we think they do. But under Biden, it's like he's handled. Like he's just out there talking and saying, the real problem is Donald Trump. Donald Trump, what he's done is terrible. What he did in the office. It's all nonsense. It's like everyone's treating him with kid gloves because they.
So this is a significant
Laugh,
turnabout.
right? I shouldn't laugh.
Oh no, I think it's fine to
laugh
laugh at a Joe Biden impression. I mean, because it's Joe Biden's choice to take the future of the democracy in his hands when there have been so many credible reports about him not necessarily being cognitively or physically able to do the job. The cover of the New York Magazine, the newest cover of New York Magazine that came out today, has a picture of Biden, Pelosi, Donald Trump, and Mitch McConnell in a race with walkers because the crisis of our gerontocracy has become literally a cover story, front page news. So I think all of that is fine. But to the Joe Rogan story, this is a significant departure from the stance he used to have on Donald Trump. He has consistently said that he's very resistant to having Donald Trump on. He has never been on the program. Back in 2020, he gave a kind of tacit endorsement of Bernie Sanders, who he did have on the program. All the other political candidates clamored to come on afterward. He didn't want to have them on because he wasn't ideologically aligned with them and he felt like they were fake. So it's an interesting question. What is it specifically that's caused him to going from, I think that Donald Trump is so dangerous or pernicious or whatever that I don't even want to give him the platform of my show, to saying I might endorse the man?
I mean, Bria, I think Rogan is realizing what a great percent of Americans are realizing, and that's just that they don't believe Donald Trump. Rather, they don't believe that Biden, I should say, has the mental faculties to lead the country. These are not Shermichael Singleton's views. These are just what a lot of people in the streets are saying, as they say. And I think in terms of the economy, you know, granted, people may make these arguments that the president doesn't directly impact the economy. I would somewhat disagree with that. The president also appoints the Fed chair. Presumably a conservative president would appoint someone else who would have a different position on how we should tackle inflation versus continuously raising rates. I mean, we're expecting rates to raise again before the end of the year. Powell also stated rates will raise more next year. I mean, so if you're in our age group, you're trying to buy a home, you're paying down student debt, you can forget about it. And so I think Rogan is speaking what many Americans believe, which is the economy's bad. We're spending a ton of money in Ukraine. Immigration is a problem. Hundreds and thousands of people are coming into the country. We have no clue who most of them are. And Joe Biden is either on the beach in Delaware or he's at the White House doing only God knows what.
Yeah, I'm open to the idea that there's some policy that's better than Joe Biden's with respect to the economy. What I do have a big issue with, and you alluded to this, is the idea that presidents are largely or even significantly responsible from the economic climate that they inherit. Like, I am no friend of Joe Biden. I don't think that is in dispute. I'm not a Democratic Party voter. I spend all my time on the show criticizing Joe Biden, but I honestly don't think that the economic conditions that we've been living in are because of him. And it's obviously attributable to the global pandemic and recession and supply chain crisis.
But you could criticize the positions of the Fed, who was appointed by Biden. And Powell has a lot of
if you do
influence
that,
on the economy.
If you do that, then Joe Biden used the word policy like 7 times in that quote without describing a single policy that Donald Trump had when he was in office that magically made the economy better, or a policy that he has articulated for if he gets elected again that would improve upon what Joe Biden is doing.
But overall economic confidence at the business level, small business level, was indeed greater. Consumer confidence was greater before COVID started, I will add,
of course
under
it was.
Trump than under Biden.
But of course it was. We had an unprecedented global pandemic. The economy
and
of
Trump
the entire
probably would have
world
won if it were
shut
not
down.
for COVID, I would say.
Right. So I mean, this does feel like, look, what I would like to see if Joe Rogan does have Donald Trump on is to ask him very specific and pointed questions, like Joe Rogan has the capacity to do, about how his economic plan differs from what Joe Biden has done. What would he have done differently than Joe Biden in the pandemic? Yeah. Would Donald Trump have passed some of the relief programs that did so much to save so many Americans, that halved child poverty? If he were in power, would he continue those programs, unlike Joe Biden, who is now having to justify why he's now presided over the doubling of child poverty?
I mean, remember, a lot of the funds that people received during COVID, that was under the Trump administration. Now, a lot of Republican governors disagreed with that, but Trump did make sure most Americans were whole during that process.
I agree. Donald Trump ended up sending out more checks numerically than Joe Biden did, because he reneged on his promise. Would Donald Trump be willing to do that again? He's been advocating for more tax cuts that disproportionately go to the wealthy. It's Donald Trump's deficit, that $1.7 trillion in tax cuts that added to the deficit. What Nikki Haley is talking about when she called out the Republican Party during the debate. Is he going to be accountable for that too? Can Donald Trump credibly make an argument about how Biden's spending on pandemic relief, much of which did go to helping working people stay afloat and was very popular, that was worse spending, or that was a policy that somehow was worse than all of the tax cuts that he did when he was in office, 85 cents of which, for every dollar of which, went to the top 1% and exploited the billionaire class. Now, Joe Biden's also responsible. Yeah. The COVID spending also inflated billionaire wealth.
Yeah, but I would say, Bree, that Trump could argue that overall consumer and economic confidence domestically and internationally, in terms of our international investors,
what is he going to do?
Wait a minute, hear me out, who buy Treasury notes. That, I would argue, does benefit the everyday person if overall overall economic confidence, I should say, is high. Investors are going to open more plants. They are going to invest more in hiring workers across the country. Now, I know some may disagree with the idea of trickle down, but that does indeed trickle down and benefit the average person. And that is a legitimate argument to make.
But if the argument is that Donald Trump's face is so inspiring that it makes the markets rise, then make that argument. But Joe Rogan sat there and said policy, and didn't point to any policies. So if it's just vibes and the markets are inspired by Donald Trump vibes, fine.
Yeah, but again, I would say a policy position, if I were advising the Trump White House, would be in terms of basis interest rate point increases. We're not going to do that any longer. I would say the Fed chief, at your point, needs to also adopt that position. That is a direct position. I would also argue securing or addressing the issues at the border. That's an important issue that have economic implications for regular working people, particularly those in the South. I would also add not sending hundreds of billions of dollars to the Ukraine and redirecting those funds for communities that need them more so to be more viable. That benefits the average American person. So there absolutely is an argument that could be made from a policy perspective.
But we're not making that argument. And those are a lot of issues that aren't the economy and inflation, which was specifically the target there. Sure. I would just say at the end, it is not true that cutting aid to Ukraine benefits Americans unless you also agree to spend more domestically, which Republicans, as a small government party, are not willing to do. They voted against all the most popular policies in the Build Back Better relief. They fought all of the spending tooth and nail, even though now Republican politicians on the local level are standing there at the ribbon cuttings and applauding all of these infrastructure projects and acting like they are responsible for them. So this is a bait and switch. I just want to be very clear to the American people. If you like the spending that has come to your state, if you liked the checks that came your way, if you liked the Medicare expansion that allowed you to keep health care through the pandemic, if you liked the distributions that were given to families to cut child poverty, then don't believe just because someone says money on Ukraine would be better spent in America that they're actually going to follow through on that promise if their whole record demonstrates that they do not want any domestic spending.
Well, I wouldn't say that they don't want any domestic spending. I mean, I would argue that access to small business loans, small business grants were easily accessible during Trump's administration.
But the PPP loans were part of the
Biden.
American Rescue Plan under Biden. Again, I have a lot of problems with that program. But
well, PPP was initiated, though, under Trump.
Okay, so we can have this shared responsibility issue, but Trump can't simultaneously say Biden and inflation is bad because he did too much spending during the pandemic.
Yeah, but my point is access to capital was easily accessible, which is what I should have said before, under Trump than Biden.
Why?
That is a fact.
Why?
What do you mean why? We had greater access to capital versus the inflationary.
But I'm asking why. If the reason is because we had a global pandemic, then that's not a policy choice that's being made by either of these men.
I would not necessarily disagree with that the president can't control a global pandemic. But again, what I would say to that is the president can adopt policies that will make access to capital more accessible. When you increase interest rates, that makes borrowing harder for everyday people. That is a policy position.
I agree. But what's Donald Trump's policy position on interest rates?
Well, he should listen to Shermichael.
He doesn't say anything.
That's my position,
That's
okay?
He doesn't say anything. So I hope that Joe Rogan nails him if he does have him on the show and ask him some questions about that. And also ask him some questions about these labor issues, the strikes all around the country that are very popular, but which Donald Trump promulgated policies to weaken labor rights. Is that going to be a tension
But people
for folks?
can change their positions. Trump has now come out and said that he stands on the sides of workers. And I think one can have a previous position, and when new evidence comes out, you can say, wait a minute, we didn't make the best decision here. Let's pivot. And I think that's what Trump is doing.
He could hypothetically do that. He could hypothetically come out saying that he wants to have a transgender vice president. He could do a lot of things.
Now you're pushing it,
But
Bree.
Shermichael, there's zero evidence of him being interested in that. So I don't think
if that were the case, he wouldn't be going to Michigan next, or what, this week?
And you guys should definitely listen to our, I think it's this week, we should listen to on Wednesday, our coverage with a labor expert, a labor writer, Alex Press, who pointed out that he is not joining the picket line and that the leader of the UAW union, Sean Fain, has explicitly said that Donald Trump and his pro-millionaire, pro-billionaire policies are exactly the problem with this country and why they're going on strike.
And to my point, a good leader will recognize the mistakes of their previous positions and change to say there's a need to do better. I think the former president should be given an opportunity to make that adjustment. We have to see what he says when he meets with those workers.
He won't be meeting with the union workers, to be clear. He's not joining the picket line. It's not clear.
So Biden joining the picket line all of a sudden is going to make everything better?
No. I have at no point complimented or
you haven't, but I'm just putting that out there.
That's a good idea. In fact, off camera, I said that I think that perhaps it's not a good idea to even allow him to join the picket line.
She did say that. I will give Bree her credit.
All right, we've got to wrap. But please come back and join us. Shermichael will be here with me tomorrow, as he will all week. We'll also have Michael Schellenberger joining us to drop some bombshell tea on new UAP whistleblowers. You won't want to miss that coverage.
And later in the week, make sure to join us Wednesday night for our 2024 debate breakdown. The Hill's Michael Schnell will speak with strategists and reporters about how the candidates did and what it means for the GOP primary going forward.
Oh, Michael Schnell, Michael Schellenberger, Shermichael. Holy smokes, you guys are trying to trip me up. Okay, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while you're on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Take care, guys.
See you tomorrow.